This is the last installment on our music database, um, and I've made some changes here. I noticed some things after I made the second, well, I guess it's the first video on this, but the Chapter 11 video too, that were small improvements, so I didn't go back to modify that video. In Input Artist, down here, actually, after I had the user input the choice of whether they wanted to input another album or not, I printed the choice right after that. There was no reason to do that. I was actually doing some error checking, so I got rid of that. And inside of Menu, I had assigned choice equal to none, and then I never used that. So there was a choice equals none here or here, I forget. I got rid of that. There was no reason for it. And the last thing was I noticed that when I was inputting albums and stuff for Input Artist, I didn't put any strips on those. So somebody could type in a space before the name of the band, and that kind of screws things up when you do that. So I put 2 strips on the name of the band and on the name of the album. I had to do it in kind of an interesting way. I tried to put the strip on just the input, and it didn't really seem to work. So I ended up just doing an input to a variable, then I stripped that variable and assigned it back to it. And I'm not sure why I had to do this sort of 2-step approach to this, but I couldn't get it to work any other way. So I think it's a good idea, though, when you have somebody typing in an input, to make sure that you remove leading blanks and ending or following blanks. Okay, so now let's go through and look at, I've implemented read music from file and save music to file. And before I do that, I want to go ahead and remind you, so I already have some music in here, I believe. Yeah, I want to remind you of what the dictionary looks like. So the dictionary of music. In this case, I only have one entry in here. It's for the key value Van Halen, so that's the band. And then I have 3 other albums for Van Halen. Van Halen, which was written in 78, Diver Down in 82, and the album 1984, which was written in 1984. Notice that these are strings, these are integers. Notice that for this key, for each band, there is a list of albums, and each album is itself a list. So hopefully you remember all of that. That's going to be important because now I have to make a decision as to how I want to write all that stuff out and subsequently read it in. And what I don't want to do is write out all this formatting information. You would have to physically write out a left brace and then a parenthesis, string characters, and write out these left brackets and right brackets and stuff. I don't want to mess with all that formatting information. So what I decided to do was I'm just going to have the first thing is going to be the band name, and then it's going to be comma, and then it's just going to be album, comma, year, comma, album, comma, year. So one entry is going to look like this. The first entry I know is going to be the band name. Then after that, it's just going to be album, year, album, year, album, year. And those are always going to come in pairs. Notice the last thing on here is actually going to be a comma. I'm going to have to pay attention to that when I read this in. So let's look at then how I save music to a file. So I'm going to take this dictionary format here and convert it over to this format. Sorry, should have paused on it a little bit longer. Convert it over to this format. So we're going from this to this, and here's how I do it. So open up the file and read write mode for artist in music list. So this is going to go through all the keys, all the bands. In this case, there's only one, so this loop will only execute once. I'm going to make a new string called file album, and the first thing I'm going to add to that string is the name of the artist, followed by a comma. So right now we have Van Halen, comma. Then for album in music list artist, so music list is a dictionary. I go to artist, so I'm going to the dictionary entry for Van Halen in this case, and that dictionary entry is the stuff after the colon, so it's this list of albums. And for each album in that list, so I take one of these albums right here, and I split it apart. I add to the string I've already built the name of the album, which is the first entry in the list for the album, a comma, and then I add the year, turning it into a string, and put a comma on the end. Because I put a comma on the end for every one, that's why in the last case there's a comma right here. Okay. And then when I get that string built up for all of the albums in the list, I write it out to the file, put a new line character on it, and I'm done. When I'm reading it in, I used kind of a trick here. So reading it in from the file, I start off with an empty dictionary, open the file in read mode, and now this for loop is going to go as a for loop through a file. So it's going to read in a line from the file, and it's just going to keep reading in lines until it gets to the end of the file. In this case, it's going to read in one line. Okay, so we read in a line from the file. That's a string. So in this case, artist is a string, and I'm going to build up something new from that. The first thing I'm going to do is strip off the end of line character on that. Should probably always do that when you read in a string from a file. And I'm going to strip off that last comma that's always going to be there. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to split this. And so remember that split takes a string and turns it into a list. So here's what's going on. There's a new line or end of line character here. Strip that off. Strip off that last comma. And then we turn this thing into a list. So in effect, we're putting brackets around it. I mean, that's one way to think of it. So now it's a list instead of it being a big long string. So it's a very different object. Now, what I want to do is first get the key out. So I want to know the name of the band. Hopefully the name of the band doesn't have any commas in it, because that's going to screw things up. So one way to work with lists is you can remove the first element in a list by doing what's called a pop. And that pop not only removes the first element, but it returns it as a value, so we can assign that to the band name. So I do a pop 0. That removes the band name and assigns that to band. Now what I want to do is go through their list of albums. So I'm going to start and construct a list of albums. So I'm going to start off with an empty list. And S-Artist at this point is this list right here. It's not stored this way in a file. This is actually in memory. I'm just showing you what it's going to look like. So in memory, we have this list. And what we're going to do is, while that list still has stuff in it, I'm going to pop off the first thing in the list, which I know is the name of an album. So in this case, the name of the album is also Van Halen. And I put that as the first element of this list. And then I do another pop, which means I'm popping off the year. I make that into a list, and then I append that to the list of albums. So now I put this album right here into my list of albums. I go back up. Are there more things in this list? Well, there are, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to pop off the first thing in that list, album title. Pop off the second thing in the list, convert it to an integer. That's going to work. We forced that to be an integer earlier. And append that to the album. So now we have Diver Down in there. And we're going to do it one more time for 1984. Append that to our list. I want to make sure there's absolutely nothing in this. And then when we're done, we need to add this information into the dictionary. And the way we're going to add that is we're going to make the key the band name, which we popped off earlier, and then the value is going to be the album list, which we've just constructed. Okay? When we're all done, we're going to return that as a database. And I've emptied this file out. Hopefully this will work. And we're going to run this. So initially, there's nothing in the file. Oh, well, I didn't apparently delete enough stuff out of this. So let's try this again. So when I run that print music database, it shouldn't print anything out. Well, All right, I'm going to try this. And I'm just going to rebuild that. What was the name of it? It was SongDB, right? Okay. SongDB dot text. Okay, let's run this again. All right, well, let's see if I can make this work. We're going to input an artist. This shouldn't be printing out those curly braces. Album, Van Halen, from 1978. And yeah, we'll put another album in. Ever Down album, 1982. And 1984 was in 1984. And OU812 was in 1988. And that should be enough, so we'll quit. Print the music database. So now we have Van Halen in there, along with its records, and we can input another one. So we'll put in the Beatles, and let's see, we'll put in White Album, 1968, and we'll put another one in, Abbey Road, and that was from 1969. Yeah, great year for Mustangs, 1969, the cars, and I think that'll be good enough. Print out the music database. Now we'll quit and see if it saved it correctly. And yeah. Again, you can't really count on the order of these dictionaries, but there they are. So again, they're stored as comma-separated lists, and then if I run this thing again, it inputs that comma-separated list and makes it into a dictionary. So that's what the input does. So these save to files and input from files, basically the function of these things is twofold: to read in from the file and to write to the file, but it's also you're converting one data type to another. So we're converting from a big long list to a dictionary type. And it's important to have the dictionary type so that it makes things like delete an artist simple. So we have an option here to remove an artist, and if we get down and take a look at that, it passes in the database, asks for the name, does a strip, and then says while band not in music list. So this is making use of the dictionary type. It's saying, is the band one of the keywords in your music list? And if it's not, we print out the music list again. Notice that I put the option of false here for the print album. So we're only printing out the bands, and then it asks, again, what band would you like to remove, because you screwed it up the first time. Notice I did not do the .strip here, so we'll add that. And then when you finally find a band that's actually in the music list here, then it's a simple matter of removing it. So the delete command is actually pretty easy. You just take the database, pass the key, and delete it. So all this code up here is just making sure that the user types in the right thing. We spend a lot of time doing that, don't we? Okay, so we'll remove an artist and their albums. So who do I want to remove? I'll remove the band Yes. Oh, that's not in our list. So it prints off Van Halen and the Beatles and says, hey, what do you want to remove here? So I will print off Van Halen. I don't want to remove Van Halen. I don't want to remove the Beatles either, but they're going. And then we'll print off the database. And so they're removed. So the actual process of removing something from a database is quite simple. The process of getting a user to type in the correct thing, that's a little more work. Okay, so there is a semi-functional music database using dictionaries and a bunch of other techniques that we have learned throughout the semester. Hopefully it wasn't too complicated.